What can a collection agent do or not do? Blair DeMarco Wettlaufer returns. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Blair DeMarco Wettlaufer, welcome back. You have been on the show, I think, 103 times. I might be wrong.
You're not tired of me yet?
No, we're not tired of you yet because we keep getting requests, people saying, oh, this guy's an actual real collection agent, so we want to have him back on. So give us the 10-second bio. You are with, what's your company?
Kingston Data and Credit. It's an international company. We have 5 branches in Canada and 1 branch in the States.
And you collect debts.
Yes.
You are a debt collector. Yes. Simple as that. So I will put links in the show notes to all of our, 7 or 8 previous conversations, many of which have been viewed many tens of thousands of times on YouTube. Because people are always wondering, okay, so what's legit and what's not?
Sure.
So I would like, and we've talked about this before, and there's some interesting stuff I want to get into, but let's start with the real basics.
Okay.
So as a collection person, what can you do and what can you not do?
Okay. So in Canada, each province and territory has collection rules, and they state what you can't do, prohibited practices. Like in Ontario, you can't call before 7 a.m. You can't call after 9 p.m. You can't call, you can't pretend to be someone you're not. You can't artificially inflate the debt. These are all common sense rules. However, when the act was written in 1975, common sense wasn't so common, and they had to put these rules in place. Now they've updated the act in 2018 to start to deal with email and SMS and what have you. But there's a list of, you can't call on Christmas Day. You can't call on a Sunday before noon. These are all what you can't do. There is a laundry list.
And what are, you would tell me that the industry basically is good. I mean, there's obviously a few players who are less reputable than others.
Back when I started in the 80s, most people didn't follow the rules. Now, 90% of the people follow the rules. The creditors don't want to give their debt to an unscrupulous collection agency because now there's this new thing called the internet, and somebody can go leave a Google review for, tell us, why'd you hire these knuckle-dragging goons, and it's out there forever. So people are now much more aware of brand reputation, so they're less likely to use the rough people.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if I'm a big bank and you're collecting a credit card for me,
right?
I don't want all that bad reputation. I mean, I spend billions of dollars on advertising. I'm sponsoring the Blue Jays. I'm doing this. I'm doing that.
Right.
And then I've got some collector who is perfectly within their rights to be calling to collect. But if they're yelling and screaming and acting like a knuckle dragger, as you say, then that's not good. So what's really keeps the collection agents in check is the possibility that their client, the big bank or whoever it is going to say, you know what, you're fired.
Well, yeah. So the Ministry of Consumer Affairs has the nuclear button. They can go, you're not a collection agency anymore. Or they can fine you saying you owe $10,000 because Bob the knuckle dragger did the wrong thing. That's an incentive to follow the rules. But even more so, you're right, the creditors, and sometimes the creditors have even higher standards than the act. We want you to, you have to, under the Privacy Act, make sure you're talking to the right person before you start disclosing personal data. There are no real hard and fast rules. So if I call and go, if I get a file for Doug Hoyes from TELUS, and I call and go, hi, is Doug Hoyes there? And you go, Doug speaking. I validated you because I've called you at the number that I think is you. You've answered by name. It could be your twin brother, Frank. I don't know, but I've followed the rules. Now, some creditors, get them to tell you their date of birth and their full street address before you disclose any information. So they could have higher and more stringent rules.
Gotcha. So, but that's all good. I think everybody should play by the rules.
Sure.
You are obviously fulfilling a function that's pretty important, because if there was nobody ever trying to collect debts, then there'd be no people lending, there'd be no mortgages, there'd be no car loans, there'd be no nothing.
Absolutely. We're not a big agency, and we probably have 1 in 12 Canadians in our office. Now, people end up in collections not because they owe $20,000 to the bank for a mortgage they didn't pay, but they had an ambulance ride they forgot to pay for, or they moved out and they forgot to pay a hydro bill, or they signed up for that gym membership, went 3 times and went, meh, and they didn't realize there's a contract. So, we have a wide variety. But right now we've got about 3 million Canadians.
Wow. So it's not insignificant, that's for sure.
No.
So you talked about, here's what we're not allowed to do. I can't call you at 3:00 in the morning, anything like that.
Right.
What are some of the things that the unscrupulous agencies are doing then that perhaps...
Okay, the horror show.
Yes.
Okay. So there are agents that will call too frequently. There are rules that say you're allowed 3 contact attempts a day. 3 contact attempts in a 7-day period in Ontario after you've had first contact with the consumer. So they could call you with a predictive dialer 28 times in a day, and as soon as you pick up and say hello, well, now they have to scale it down. I personally, I don't want to try calling someone more than 3 times a week, even before I reach
you're just going to upset. And I get lots of people come in and talk to me and say, yeah, I'm getting a call every hour. And I'm going, well.
But that's because they have a predictive dialer and they built it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's 1990s technology. You can't disclose debt on an answering machine. So the consumer has a right to privacy. So you don't want to call and go, hey, Bob, this is Blair calling from Kingston Data and Credit. You know that bank loan you took out? You better call me. You can't say that because it's disparaging. It discloses personal information. And we often get, this is Timmy's mother. Timmy's out of the country for a week. Can you tell me what it is? No, Timmy's mother, I cannot.
Now, tell me about re-aged debt.
Okay.
And the reason I'm asking this question, this podcast will come out, I believe, in October of 2024. There were some new rules affecting how insolvencies are processed. We're not going to get into all of that.
We already have.
We've talked about it before. But the point is, there are different rules for new versus old debt.
Yes.
And specifically, a debt drops off your credit report after 6 years.
Correct. And
the limitations period in Ontario is 2 years. You got to sue someone within 2 years. So there is a strong incentive for a collector or a creditor to have the debt as young as possible.
100%. And not just put it on a shelf. So what happens, especially with bigger creditors? You have a debt. They call you for the first 30, 60, 90 days, and then they give it to collection agency A. And they work it for 6 to 12 months, and then they pull it, and they give it to agency B. And they work it for 6 to 12 months, and then they pull it and give it to agency C for another 6 to 12 months. And then they go to a debt buyer X, and they say, would you like to buy this debt? And they sell them $1 billion at 1/10 of a cent on the penny. And the debt buyer then says, hey, agency A, I'm going to assign you these files. And the whole process starts over. So a debt with a major creditor could pass through 7 or 8 hands. And of course, that debt's getting older and older and older and older. So a debt buyer could be assigning files to a collection agency that's 2 years old or 12 years old. Now, one thing an agency can't do, they can't threaten to do something they don't have the legal right to do. So you can't call somebody on a $50 file and threaten to sue them. You can't call someone on a 12-year-old debt and threaten to affect their credit rating. That's just common sense. But often what happens is there's a degradation of data. The debt buyer only knows what the creditor gave them on a spreadsheet. So it's entirely possible when it gets to an agency, they say, this debt was incurred in 2021. Well, no, it was incurred in 2016. It was written off in 2021, and the creditor filled out the spreadsheet wrong or what have you.
So I got a number of questions about that. But first, when someone is calling me, are they collecting on behalf of the original creditor, or are they a debt buyer who's bought the debt?
Okay. Good question. So when you represent a debt buyer, you must tell the consumer that you represent the debt buyer, and you must tell the consumer who the original creditor was. That has to appear on the initial collection letter, and you have to tell them, I'm representing Techco Inc., who own your Hudson's Bay credit card, if there was a Hudson's
Gotcha.
Bay. Yeah. That sort of thing. When I first started doing, and sometimes it can get complicated. Like way back in the 90s when I started, I did collections for Canadian Tire Acceptance, which wasn't really Canadian Tire. They had this division. Actually, it was called the Hamilton Discount Corporation. And they owned the Office Depot credit card, the Dalmies credit card, the IKEA credit card, all those private credit cards. You weren't borrowing from IKEA, you were borrowing from Canadian Tire Acceptance and their division, Hamilton Discount Corporation. So I had to explain, this is who you think the debt is this, but it's actually this creditor. You have to present that debt to the consumer correctly.
Gotcha. In most cases, the collector is calling on behalf of the original creditor, the bank, the credit card company, TELUS, the gym,
but
whatever.
But if it's been sold, the collection agency has to say,
tell you.
Your debt has been assigned or sold to X company. We represent X company.
Gotcha. So, and as a collector, you are getting compensated how? You're getting a commission? How does it typically
Usually.
work?
So most agencies work on a contingency or commission basis. They get to keep a percentage or bill the client a percentage of what is collected. That could be 5%. That could be 50%. It depends on the age of the debt, what they've negotiated with the creditor. Now, debt buyers, obviously, if you buy $1 billion of debt for $10 million, you want to recover your $10 million and hopefully a couple extra dollars. So they get compensated by collecting a percentage of what they've bought. And then, of course, if they hire an agency, they have to, the agency wants to get paid too. So it has to, the debt buyer wants to collect roughly double or triple what they paid for to keep the wheels running and the lights on.
But that gives a bit of insight if I'm the consumer.
Yes.
And I'm getting a call and they're phoning on behalf of a debt buyer. Okay, so the debt is $10,000. I know the debt buyer probably paid, I don't know, $10 or $50 or whatever.
But you can't offer the collection agent or the debt buyer $50 because they have a $10 million debt they're trying to pay off.
Right. But if I offer them half or a third.
No reason you can't. Absolutely. Now, there's a good prohibited practice. If you make a settlement arrangement with a collector, get it in writing. It's called conditional letter of release. On condition of paying half of my $10,000 debt by this date, I am released from this debt. Otherwise, you could make a verbal arrangement with the collector. Can I pay half? Sure you can. They pay half, and then 2 weeks later, hey, about that other half. But you said, that would, you get it in writing.
And so how do I get it in writing? Do I say, hey, Blair, I'm willing to do a deal, and you say, okay, fine, we'll accept $1,000 in full settlement.
Yeah.
I get you to shoot me an email?
Yep, it can be an email, it can be a mailed letter, but you should have something on company letterhead saying X dollars by Y date released from this debt. Now, I always offer, my agency doesn't do a lot of settlements. We do a lot of let's freeze the interest. Let's just make a reasonable payment plan. Let's not have you treading water. But I do have some creditors, or a consumer will say, my husband just lost his job. I owe 1 million people. Can I do a settlement? We'll go back to our client and say, and there's another thing. The collection agency can't do a settlement without the permission of the creditor. Now, some big creditors will say, you can settle for 80% of the debt. Don't even bother me. But some are, you got to send me the reason and you got to fill out this form with 500 questions on why should we take half. So there is a process to that internally that the consumer doesn't see.
Gotcha. So there's no downside to me trying to make a deal, whether you accept it or not.
Worst that can happen is they say no. And the agency will probably go to bat for you because getting you to pay a lump sum, well, you've paid it. The agency gets paid. They don't have to call you anymore. They're happy. It's convincing so often you can get the agency on side with you, and the agent will say, look, I'd love to settle this. Give me a reason. Yeah. Okay, give me a better reason. That sort of thing.
And we'll go sell it.
Yeah.
And obviously that's kind of why I exist, because if they can't make a deal with you, well, they come and see me, file a consumer proposal, and we try to get everyone on board. Okay, so if one of these prohibited practices is happening, I'm getting a phone call at 3 a.m. or any of these other things you just mentioned. What can I do about it?
Okay. So the first thing is talk to the agency, see if it's an honest mistake, because agencies call the wrong number, or they show you have a Toronto phone number and you moved to BC and kept your Toronto cell phone number and we're calling you at 5 a.m. and we think you're in Ontario. Tell the agency first, do you know about this? Or if they present a debt, well, this is from 2021. No, it's from 2016. Can you prove that it's from 2021? Take a moment, talk to the agency, get the agency to investigate. Often bigger agencies will have a consumer ombudsman or a consumer assistance line. You don't have to deal with Todd, the angry collector, if you don't want to. If that doesn't work, you can go to the Ministry of Consumer Affairs website, and you can just type it, Google Ontario Collection Agency Complaint Ministry, and it'll come up. The page will come up saying, well, first, have you tried talking to the collection agency? So try that first. The second thing is there's a form you can fill out. Now, it's not fast. If you file a complaint today, mid-September, I'll see it end of October, early November.
So a couple of months.
Yeah. So, make sure if you're having a problem with a serious problem with an agency, like they're calling you 20 times a day or at 3 a.m, make sure you tell them, okay, I am instructing you via email, registered letter. You are not to call me. You are only to communicate with me by letter mail. By the way, I've filed a complaint with the ministry. Be prepared.
And it's the Ministry of
Consumer Affairs.
Consumer Affairs. Okay.
Yeah, in Ontario.
In Ontario.
Each ministry has a different.
Yeah. And every province, these are provincially regulated things. So, my general advice is, well, if a collection agent's calling you and you owe the debt, pay it.
Well, or at least talk to them. An average collection agent makes 100 calls and reaches 15 people. That means they're leaving 85 answering machine messages or, 85 no answers, and your phone is going to ring and ring and ring. There's no harm in answering the phone and saying, what's this all about? In fact, it can end things, because if I'm calling you and you say, what's this all about? Oh, this is a Rogers debt from 2014. It's statute barred. Don't call me anymore. Okay. I have to follow the rules.
Yep. Or, I didn't realize I owed $200. Let me send you the money and we're done.
Yeah. You wouldn't know the number of people that call us. You're on my credit rating. How dare you? And we called you. We left you 9 messages before we put it on your credit rating. You should have called us back. Well, what's the balance? Well, here's the balance with interest. Can we cut a deal? No, it's 2 years later. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
And that happens all the time. So picking up the phone or returning the call can't hurt you, and it could actually give you some information. And if you tell the agent in a calm, reasonable voice, look, I'm out of work. I'm barely making groceries. I'm sorry, I can't pay anything. Do what you got to do. Done. Then the agent will stop calling.
Yeah, they can sue you. They can stop calling. They can write it off.
The worst they can do is put it on your credit bureau. And if the balance is, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 and it's within the statute of limitations and you're gainfully employed, they could sue you. But if you're out of work, they're not going to sue you.
Yeah.
That's a lot of cost.
You're spending money to get nothing.
You get this expensive piece of paper called a judgment. Now what? Yeah, there's no point.
So speak up, talk, work something out. If it's really something illegal, you can make a complaint. But otherwise, either if you can pay it, pay it. If you can't, well, then you're talking to me. We're doing a consumer proposal, whatever.
Sure.
Okay, now let's get into the interesting stuff. And my cue cards are blank, but they're good. They're good props here. So you mentioned about predictive dialers.
Yes.
And
terrible things.
Yeah, robocallers.
And and big agencies still use them.
So you don't use them?
No.
And because they don't work, or because?
Well, so I worked for an agency in the early 2000s. And I was the ops manager, and the agency owners called me and said, what do you think about predictive dialers? Oh, they're brute force engines. They're stupid. You couldn't pay me to. Well, we have a client giving us 30,000 files. Okay. And then next week, they're giving us 10,000 files. Okay. And then next week, okay, I guess I have to build a predictive dialer. So I built one because I'm a bit of a techie. And they can work, but they're terrible. So a predictive dialer, Agent Bob sits down, puts on his headphones, logs in, jacks into the matrix, and it makes 4 simultaneous calls for Bob. And if it gets no answer, it hangs up. If it gets an answering machine, it leaves a pre-recorded message. If somebody picks up and says hello, it says that's a human being.
Put it through to Bob.
So it quadruples Bob's effectiveness. But when you end up with a room with 100 people and somebody picks up and says hello, it doesn't go to Bob. It goes to one of the 100 people that's been waiting the longest. So you're not basing your collections on Bob's skills. You're only as good as your weakest link. And a consumer will, if they answer the phone 10 times, they're going to talk to 10 different people. So you can't build rapport. I don't like them because I believe consumers are human beings. And if they start talking to Rachel, they should end talking to Rachel, and Rachel should be able to listen. And if they have Rachel's number, they should have a good chance of calling it and getting Rachel.
Okay, that's all well and good, but it's now 2024.
Yes.
And the answer is, okay, I understand these predictive dialers, they're kind of brute force, old-fashioned things, but we got this new thing, Blair. AI, yes. Artificial intelligence. So,
yes. I saw a demo for that last year.
So how does this work? What's going to happen in the collection agency? How long is it going to be before I am getting a call, not from Rachel, the human being, but Rachel, the artificial intelligence
It's happening
person?
Now.
Already happening.
It's already happening. So there are a lot of tech companies that are rolling out, that have realized, hey, I have this cool toy. I could go to a collection agency and make lots of money. And they're demoing their tools to collection agencies. Now, collection agencies say, well, you have to say this, and the rules are this. And, you know, if a person says X, we want to respond with Y. So it's still in the early stages, but it's coming. There was a Canadian Society for Collection Agency conference, and the ministry representative for Ontario was there, and he's like, well, we keep a list of collection agents. I guess we're going to have to keep a list of, you know, virtual collection agents. So if HAL 9000 works for your agency, we want to know. So, and
when you're talking about the difference between a human, so every human being who works for you, who's a registered agent, is in the government's computer.
That's right.
So if Bob is swearing at me, I can phone up the ministry and say, Bob from this agency was swearing at me.
You know, Bob Smith with this weird phone number called and didn't say what agency he's from. You know, the agency can look up, oh, that's with this agency.
But if it's AI, there could be 1,000 different voices, 1,000 different names. How do you even regulate that?
Okay. So, well, you have to. So obviously, so the ministry wants to know certain things. So they want to list, in Ontario, they want to list each month, who are your agents, who's new, who's left, you know, tell us who works for your agency. If you're doing first party collections where you're not calling as the agency, but you're an extension of the accounts receivable department. Hi, this is UPS calling. They want to know that you represent UPS. So if they get a complaint for Bob from UPS, they know it's you. So same thing with the AI. They want your AI agent to have a name, and they want to know that you're using it. But this is all very new.
Well, and the other nice thing about AI is I can have a male voice, a female voice. I can have every different accent imaginable. I can, have it.
Sure. And I have found that, some collection, some industry business, people respond better to a female voice than a male voice. It's just human nature. But right now it's still early. Like the demo I heard last fall, hi, would you like to pay? Like it was rough, but I heard another demo 2-3 months ago and it was pretty smooth. Like it's coming along quickly. So AI will work like a predictive dialer, but it'll have more features. So you pick up the phone. Hi, this is Hal calling from Kingston Data and Credit. I'm calling, is this Bob Smith? Yes, this is Bob. Well, Bob, I'm calling you on behalf of XYZ Hospital on a medical bill. I'm calling to see if you'd like to arrange payment or should we report this to the credit bureau? That's all what a human being will do. But it's going to be limited. At some point, somebody's going to say, well, Timmy fell down a well and my grandmother's got cancer and da-da-da. And the AI agent won't be able to handle it. But it could handle very basic transactions of, oh, I want to pay that. Excellent. Go to our website and pay. So it'll be like a predictive dialer, but modernized.
Yeah, and I've had a demo as well, and of this. I don't know why they're demoing it for me. I'm not a collection agent, but they wanted to show it to me. And so it's exactly as you describe it. Hi, it's obviously there's a decision tree. If they say this, ask that.
Yeah.
And what's changed is the AI can actually understand what you're saying.
Yes.
As opposed to a predictive dialer, which is just an answering machine.
Really?
Or just words. So, and we all know this because I can talk to my phone. Instead of typing out the text, I can talk it and it types it out. Obviously, it can translate words into meaning.
This has been around for a while and it's building. Like there are debt buyers that have an AI engine where you can go in and go, hi, I think I owe you a debt. Oh, let me look you up. Oh, you owe this much. What payment arrangement would you like to make? Oh, I'd like to pay $50 a month. Oh, well, I'm looking at your credit bureau and I see you can do $200. Like that has existed for like 5-6 years.
Yeah, and the demo I saw, it was, the AI asks you and you go, oh, yes, okay, I could actually pay that. Okay, great. When would you like to make the payment? Okay, I can do it next week. Fantastic. What we're going to do is text you a link to our online payment portal.
Yeah.
So you can just go in and put the payment in.
Because if you had AI taking credit card payments, now we're in a different world. And there are compliance things. So if an AI calls you, the agency, if it has 10 agents or more, has to record the call. So it still needs to record that call and have a record of what Hal said to you. So if there's a complaint later, we've got it. And it's got to have the function to transfer the call. If somebody's speaking with a heavy accent or they're outside the parameters, let me get you a human being.
And then you have the person there. So right now, this is already happening.
Yep.
But if you had to put a percentage on it, it's like less than 1% of all collection calls.
5% or less. Yeah.
A very small number.
It's just coming in. Like right now, we've been doing SMS and email for like 9 years. agencies are just coming into, like the bulk of agencies are just coming into SMS texting now. There are some agencies that still can't do SMS. And, email is a thorny subject because if I'm a collection agency for a big bank, the big bank has exceptional rules and they say, none of your agents can have email, or a link to the internet. And well, now how am I supposed to communicate with someone via email?
Yeah, it's impossible then.
Yeah.
Which is kind of Revenue Canada's problem. The CRA can't communicate by email either.
Right.
But if you and I are talking again 2 or 3 years from now.
Oh, it's all going to change again.
And so the percentage at that point could be 30%, 50%. It could be significant.
Absolutely.
Because this sounds to me like a way for a collection agency to massively increase their productivity.
To some degree. Like the way AI stands right now, it is not built to call someone on a $20,000 second mortgage that the person's defaulted on and review their personal finances and say, oh, maybe you should go to a trustee, or, okay, I see you've got, these creditors, let's do this. It's not that sophisticated yet, but for like a $200 debt, sure, pay it or don't.
Yeah, because on a $200 debt, if your commission is 20%,
$40.
And if you got to make 10 phone calls
to
over,
get money. That's right. Well, that's the math. Agencies spend 80% of their time not talking to people. So they've got to measure, am I talking to enough people to make it worthwhile and pay people a living wage, and build an environment where collection agents don't hate their jobs and their soul and, going into work every day or logging in remotely.
Right. So the AI will initially be doing a lot of these small dollar calls.
Or really old files, because, if you have files from 2018, numbers are probably wrong, or, people aren't going to answer.
Yeah.
So, it could weed it out. Hal could call 100 files, determine 5 are valid numbers, and then those 5 files could get moved to a human being.
And I guess as the technology improves, the cost comes down.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
These AI companies might be, so right now, none of these agencies are building it in-house. They're paying tech companies for a tool, just like there are agencies that pay phone companies for a predictive dialer system or cloud storage for, call recordings. Like a lot of agencies aren't technically savvy. They just pay another company to do that service.
But when you and I have talked in the past, you told me, and certainly since the events of 2020, there's been significant consolidation in your industry. Yeah,
there's much less. Very, the number of agencies, it's in Ontario right after the pandemic was like 190. Compared to the over 400 that existed before the pandemic.
Which means the agencies that are left are bigger.
Yes.
And
I think most of the ones we lost were the small agencies with like 2 collectors.
Yeah, that just couldn't compete. Well, if they're bigger, then that means they've got more capital. They can actually invest in AI and all these other things.
Absolutely.
So that's something that should come. So if I'm a consumer and I get a call from Joe the digital assistant, do I deal with that any differently than I deal with?
No, same.
Exactly the same. Pretend it's a human being.
Well, and some people don't want to talk to a robot. Just hit 0 or say, I want to speak to a human being. Or is this a virtual agent?
Yeah.
Because, the banks have gotten sophisticated when you call in, hi, this is Susie, the virtual agent. Or sometimes you can't even tell it's a virtual agent.
Yeah. The demo I heard, it sounded like a human being.
Yeah.
And the rules are such that there are no rules.
Well, there's still the prohibited practices.
But there's no rule that says you have to identify whether you're a human or not.
Not yet. But you're right. There's no rule. So in the States, you don't have to license agents like you do in Canada. So a lot of agencies in the States outsource that to Bangladesh or Guam or whatever, or the Philippines, and they're using agents overseas. In Canada, it's much harder to do that. But you didn't have to identify you're talking to Frank in Bangladesh. Same thing. You don't have to identify that it's Susie the virtual agent. That doesn't exist. But you can ask, and if there are a lot of complaints, they'll put rules in place.
Gotcha. So we can expect some kind of change at some point in the future, no doubt.
I remember talking to a registrar like 9 years ago, saying, I'm thinking of using texting this way. And he was a very blunt individual. He's like, don't be a jerk. I won't make a rule.
Yeah.
The rules exist when people have gone off the rails.
They've pushed it.
Yeah.
So, okay. Final question for you.
Sure.
is there anything else you would like to tell the listener? I mean, I think we've covered the basic things, which is if you get a call from a collection agent, you want to confirm that they're validly collecting it. They've got to be able to prove that they're collecting who they say they are.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's as simple as, well, if you can, pay it, make a deal, do. If you can't, you can't. Is there anything else to know?
So there are prohibited practices that exist on the outside. Like if you use Frank the dentist, and Frank is a small company, he doesn't know any better. But he knows the agency's charging him 20%. Frank might take the 20% and add it on top of the bill and then list it with the agency. And the agency doesn't know, but that's illegal. A collection agency can only collect the lawful amount you owe. So the actual bill with any interest, they can, if the dentist has said, on your invoice, you'll pay 2% a month, they can apply that, but they can't add that 20% on top. So if you question the balance, say, show me how I owe this balance. Give me a breakdown. Agencies are required to provide that. If you think a debt is old, that's not from 2021, ask for proof of it. Even if it's with a debt buyer, the debt buyer has an obligation to go back to the original creditor and say, give me copies of the statements. If you feel an agent is calling you too often or they're being abusive, try to in a calm, reasonable voice, say, hey, I'm trying to work with you here. I'm not one of these people that, avoids your calls. Calm down. And if that doesn't work, talk to someone else in the agency. Because it could just be a personality clash. You could be stressed because you owe money and your voice goes up a little, and that agent had 5 people yell at them in the last hour and their voice goes up a little. Talk to a fresh person.
Yeah, I think we're all human. We all have our jobs to do.
No one wants to owe debt. No one. No. And no one said, well, when I grow up, I want to be a bill collector.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Or a bankruptcy trustee.
It's true.
So just take a calm voice. Ask for proof. If a call isn't going well, try to communicate with the person via email or in writing, because then you have a paper trail. And question things. There's nothing wrong with you saying, well, how did this balance get to this point?
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in the paper trail. Great. Send me something that says who you are, who you're collecting for,
Absolutely.
Where the money comes from, and then I'm willing to work on it. And again, if you can pay it, great. If you can't, well, then you're looking at other options like a consumer proposal.
if you're in too deep, don't flail. Like if you've borrowed money from 5 payday loan companies and you're paying $500 a month in interest, something's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah.
And paying one of them isn't going to solve your problem.
No. If you got 4 cuts in your arm, one Band-Aid on one of the cuts isn't going to do it.
Exactly.
Maybe it slows it down, but it doesn't
I mean, if you can get the creditors to cease the interest, great. But it depends who you borrowed from.
Yeah.
Borrowing from a bank, they might defer a car payment if you're having trouble. Borrowing from a finance company that financed your Skidoo, they might freeze the interest. Tony, the guy on the corner with his payday loan store.
Not so much.
Yeah,
I totally agree. So excellent. Well, there's a bunch of practical advice. We'll all be keeping an eye out for those AI calls that I'm sure we'll be getting. Blair, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what we will do in the show notes is put links to all of Blair's stuff, his previous appearances, his Twitter, all the rest of it. He's got a blog. We'll put all that in there so you can track him down. My commercial today is that we have an Instagram account. Okay. Ooh. I've never looked at it because I'm not that tech savvy, but please follow us on Instagram. Look for Hoyes Michaelis, and we got lots of great stuff. And of course, there will be clips of this interview that at some point will appear on Instagram. In fact, we've run clips of you from your previous things. So
I've seen the shorts on YouTube.
There you go. Shorts on YouTube. And so if you're watching on YouTube, again, click all the buttons, like, subscribe. New show comes out every Saturday morning. And there will be another show next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.